I'm actually the chairman of the Financial Scrutiny. We call ourselves Fringe Committee of Save the Parish. And so thank you very much for coming today. I want to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We have timed this pretty well to leave about 10-15 minutes for questions. But given what we all just been through in terms of the delay, if there aren't enough time for questions at the end, then please just see one of us speaking today, and we're more than happy either to answer your question then and there, or to get you more information about some of the information that we're sharing. Secondly, if you do speak at some point today, Clive here, who's making a video for us that we can share later, may turn the camera towards you, but don't worry, he won't be filming you when he does that. It's just to get your voice, okay? So with that, let's get started. We'd like to think this is going to be a positive Fringe event. We've called it Growing in Confidence. We've chosen this title because in recent years, maybe more than just recent, if I had to comment, the Church of England has found itself in a defensive position, akin to a defeated army fighting a rearguard action, just trying to save what you can. We believe that now is the time to change our mindset. So it's really a change of mindset. It's time to grow our church in confidence and play to our strengths, embracing a new paradigm that revitalizes our mission. So rather than continue to reduce the number of ordained clergy serving our parishes, we maintain that we can and should confidently and faithfully provision for the cure of souls throughout our nation out of the wealth that the church has available. And we can do that sustainably, in a sustainable fashion, without drawing down or spending the corn seed, as we say. A key enabler will be making sure dioceses have the annual income necessary to fund all of the parish priests they need. And we saw that in some of the debate on the 5 votes and the apportionment, and some of that frustration that we all have been experiencing for a while. Save the Parish has existed for less than 2 years, but already its financial scrutiny group has undertaken considerable analysis of the church finances, which has yielded revelations, at least for us, that we've shared in previous Fringes. Following our latest detailed analysis of what we call here DSF, that's Diocesan Stipendiary Funds, and drawing on our previous analysis of these, we're going to share some proposals on how dioceses can obtain the income to fund all of the parish priests. Now, these are proposals, but they're also an example of thinking a little more creatively. And so when I talk about a mindset change, it's not just glomming on and saying, well, you didn't think about that, you didn't think about that, what about this? It's about that mindset that says we do need to start looking for other types of solutions. And we want to get that conversation started. First, though, before we jump into those proposals, we're going to look at why we need to plan and resource for growth. Attempts have been made to give the impression that there is no correlation, let alone causal link, between parish priest numbers and congregational size. We often hear church attendance grows or shrinks based on a number of factors, but none of them have to do with the availability of ordained clergy. But what if this assertion simply wasn't true? So John, who I'll introduce you to next, is a member of Save the Parish Financial Scrutiny Group like myself, and he is going to take us through the analysis he has undertaken into this subject. So John, please.
Thank you. I quickly cut my speech down from 45 minutes to about 12, so. I'd like to start with a question and answer which were raised at February Synod. So if you would like, it's going to come up on the slide, and I'll pause for a moment whilst it'll stay there, and I'll just give you a chance to have a quick look at it. Whilst you're digesting it, I'll start to go through the spiel. So the question was, what does the research reveal about the impact of pooling parishes into multi-parish benefices and the potential effect on church growth and how the House of Bishops was taking this into account. And the reply was that 3-point reports on the Church of England website indicate no significant difference in church growth with different numbers of churches in the benefice. So, was the Bishop of Manchester's response correct? Well, whilst the Bishop was referring to from anecdote to evidence and going deeper, he failed to refer to other reputable research like the Joint Theos and Church Urban Fund report of 2020 on growing good, and the Church of England's Resource Strategy and Development Unit report of 2016 on amalgamating parishes and declining clergy numbers. So let's consider these 4 reports and their findings. Firstly, the 2 referenced by the Bishop. From anecdote to evidence does provide support for the Bishop's response. However, the work was based on reports and research done in 2011 to 2013, and clearly some things have changed. Going deeper, the second paper mentioned by the Bishop was published in 2016. Importantly, its summary note on clergy numbers includes the following statement: "It is changes in clergy resource rather than benefit structure which are associated with the likelihood of growth or decline, albeit that reductions in clergy resource are often implemented through the amalgamation of parishes." And from the 2 alternative studies, the Joint Theos and Church Urban Fund report states in its executive summary, "We find the church grows in number and depth when it is present in and connected to the local area." Well, the Church's Resource Strategy and Development Unit's report acknowledges that the research found that an increase in the number of clergy over time is associated with a greater likelihood of there being attendance growth. A decrease in clergy is associated with a greater likelihood of there being a decline in attendance growth. So apart from the first, anecdote to evidence, all of the other reports reveal that resourcing clergy and maintaining a local presence has a positive impact on the Church's growth. Further evidence can be found in the National Churches Trust report, House of Good, with its foreword signed off by the NCT's joint presidents, the Archbishops of York and Canterbury. This stated, "For the very first time, our House of Good report quantifies the economic and social value of all church buildings to the UK. Not just the bricks and mortar, but the welfare and well-being they create in our communities. Our latest 2021 research now shows that the annual social and economic value of church buildings to the UK is worth about 55 billion. This sum calculated using the latest HM Treasury Green Book guidance and includes the contribution churches made to well-being and local economies. I would suggest this House of Good report makes a compelling case for keeping churches. And these are not the only reports that conflict with the Bishop's answer. Let us consider the Church of Wales, now into its 11th year since an external review led it to the introduction of its system of ministry areas. It is still struggling to achieve success. Indeed, as recently as September 2022, it was announced that it had set aside 100 billion to fund evangelism. The report goes on to say, governing body members discuss the future in small groups before open debate. Feedback showed that challenges to moving away from a static institutional model included reluctance to travel and collaboration with others in mission and ministry. The fear of stretching too few clergy too far, the territorial and competitive nature of different dioceses holding us back. We might ask what the outcome might have been if 100 million had been invested in new parish priests. Effectively, it would have paid for 180 new priests over 10 years, taking a cost of 55k per annum. Or there was an article in the Church Times, the 6th of April this year, on a report of church attendance in October 2022, and it suggested that taking data from 5 dioceses, there is a strong correlation between reduced provision and reduced attendance. Numbers are lower than in 2019, not because the demand for church is in inevitable decline, but because of difficulties with the supply of both on-site and online church services. Anecdotally, there is more evidence to suggest the C of E has got it wrong. My own benefits of 3 churches, all within walking distance of each other. Whenever we hold a joint service, the attendees from the other 2 churches drops by at least 50%. And I think you find this pattern replicated across the country. The slide you just shows the ideal situation. But in my diocese, we have, for example, 1 full-time stipendiary priest being expected to minister to 13 parishes, or another with 11 parishes, and no other support available. Despite what I've said, too many bishops appear to be ignoring the evidence, and based on the various letters and reports one reads, the wishes of their congregations, PCCs and deaneries, the case in point being Truro. As reported on the 13th of May in the Church Times in 2022, there is strong resistance in this diocese from parishes to cuts in stipendiary clergy and the concomitant move to so-called resource church programme. Criticisms mention inadequate consultation, particularly at deanery and PCC level. The plan to grow 55 oversight ministers has been barely mentioned. And where will the supposed 105 local leaders, the 30 pioneers, and the increase in church wardens from 358 to 500 come from? Further criticism of this strategy for change and renewal was aired in the Region's paper, the West Britain, earlier this year. The problems caused by clergy reductions include one example from Easter this year of a 19-year-old deaf retired priest being driven around by his elderly wife to take services around the diocese. And at Merrymeet, when Easter was celebrated, it was in a tent because the church was locked. We can look at Leicester. This diocese is coming through criticism from numerous sources following the announcement of the implementation of the Lawn Ministry Community, the first of 3 pilot areas. This brings together 8 benefices comprising 24 parishes and 35 churches under a so-called oversight minister. Importantly, there is no such role in ecclesiastical law, and it's anticipated that the appointed minister for each individual church will be lay, ordained stipendiary or non-stipendiary. A 20% reduction in full-time stipendiary posts is forecast by 2026. This, despite the Law Implementation Team's own report published last October, which warned of the doom loop, whereby reducing stipendiary clergy reduces giving. Centrally, the Church has failed to direct money in many cases where it is most needed. In the past 3 years, money was deliberately kept away from rural parishes, and even that directed to growth has in some areas had little effect, as evidenced by the Church report, which we heard in Synod last year. As dioceses and parishes emerge from the financial impact of COVID, the Church commissioners who could have helped declined. failure to recruit and train clergy is a major part of the problem. Giles Fraser highlighted the problems with clergy morale in an article in March 2022. It is a wonder that any prospective priest apply for training at all, given the defeatist attitude that we see sometimes adopted by the Central Church, and certainly in some dioceses, and the lack of importance placed on provision of parish clergy compared with so many dioceses' enthusiasm for recruiting more highly paid bureaucrats in their central HQs. We hear of priests leaving either disillusioned, overworked, or bullied out of post. Parishes surviving because of support from retired priests, long interregnums, but not apparently for bishopric vacancies. Large numbers of vacancies in some dioceses for priests. In May this year, my own diocese had 27 vacancies, with no response to some repeated adverts. Even those training are not guaranteed a post. For example, a recent report of an ordinary in Coventry who was warned he might be without a first curacy. He is now going to Australia. With Leicester, Truro and others sucking parishes into large conglomerates in order to save money, this is likely to be the tip of the iceberg. To finish, let me quote from the Law Implementation Team's quote in Leicester, which I think will come up on the slide. No, I'll read it to you then. Should the number of clergy be constrained due to lack of funds, then this will clearly impact the number of services and spiritual support. Parishioners will ask what the parish contribution is going towards, whether there is a low level of spiritual support provided. This may well create a doom loop, where giving further reduces, and thus less funding further shrinks the number of clergy available. Are Leicester and Truro to be the future? Thank you.
So, I'm now going to introduce Rob McNeil Wilson, who's going to help us out of this doom loop. So I started by saying this would be a positive fringe. It might not sound positive at this point, but hang in there, because we can reverse that doom loop into a virtuous circle, whereby just making small changes down here, the whole direction begins to change. And I don't want to eat up more time, so Rob.
I'm going to share 4 radical but viable proposals to improve the management of diocesan stipend funds and their investment and glebe assets. It's positive today because we're going to be talking about the revitalisation of parishes and the parish system. And the good news is that this is actually possible because there is no shortage of money. So, there's 4 areas in which we need to look at improvement. There's the glebe management deficiencies. In a lot of cases, dioceses don't even know what glebe land they hold. The diocesan stipend fund, it's poorly managed, and many of the dioceses don't actually use their DSFs. We've spoken before about total return accounting and its underutilisation, and this is an area in which we can make a lot of improvement. And the really big one and the radical one for today is looking at how we address the huge shortfalls in diocesan stipendary fund. First thing is in February, with the General Synod in February, I made my maiden speech, in which I welcomed GS 2255A. This was particularly welcome because it actually recognised the inadequacy of the diocesan stipendiary funds, and that many dioceses are in deficit, and it specifically recognised the need for rebalancing of church funding. This is something that Save the Parish has consistently advocated. However, there's a reason why this is not the answer for us. It's actually futile for two reasons. Firstly, it's unlikely that it would ever be justifiable or legal to actually do it, and the second thing is it fails to address the scale and root cause of the problem. So why would it possibly be illegal? It's intended to allow diocesan stipends funds to be transferred from one diocese to another, or to a central fund to be administered to provide to other diocese stipendiary funds. Why is it likely to be illegal? The GS 2255A would lift geographical restrictions to enable money standing, this is to quote, money standing to the credit of the income account of the diocesan stipends fund of a diocese, and which the Diocesan Board of Finance is satisfied does not need to be applied for a purpose specified in section 5.1. That purpose is to provide for their own priest stipends, to be transferred for use by other dioceses. However, no diocese could legally claim to have funds in its DSF that it didn't actually need for the specified purpose, which is stipends for its own clergy, if it were cutting its own parish priest numbers or allowing vacancies to remain unfilled, or if it was still reliant upon the voluntary contributions of parish share, which was introduced to address financial deficiencies, or if it was running a deficit, which is pretty much all dioceses. Also, any diocesan stipend fund that, or any diocese that had was intending to do this with insufficient priests to cover the parish in every benefice would be unlikely. They'd be likely to face a furious and justified backlash from its deaneries and benefices and parishes. So it's highly unlikely that even our most wealthy dioceses could make such a transfer legitimately or legally. The second fatal flaw of this proposed amendment was that it enabled inter-diocese transfers of DSF. It's its complete failure to address the root causes and the scale of the problems mentioned, which are that most dioceses have stipendiary funds which are wholly inadequate, and if the sort of transfers that they were talking about were possible, they would have negligible impact. So what we propose is a radical change in terms of transfers direct from the Church Commissioners' funds into the diocesan stipendiary funds. Now, if you look at this league table of diocesan stipendiary funds, the scale, the actual values it's quoted in is thousands, and the DSF figure was the figure in 2021, and the transfer figure is the amount that would be needed to top it up to the level that we are going to talk about in this example. If you look at the bottom of the league table, we've got a diocese with only 500,000. That's barely enough to generate sufficient income to support a single parish priest. To revitalise our parish system, most dioceses need injections of many millions of pounds into their diocese funds, stipendiary funds, to make their parish ministry supportable and sustainable. You can see from the table that in the top 10, they are in a range between 55 million in their DSF to 117 million. As examples, if we made transfers of just less than 10% of the Church Commissioners' funds to the diocesan stipends funds, that would lift all of the diocesan stipendiary funds to above a level of 60 million. There'd be other work to do with this. I mean, this is just an indicative figure, just to show what could be achieved. What is actually going to be needed thereafter is detailed calculations based on a number of parameters, and these are the sorts of things in this chart that we would need to take into consideration. So the DSF amendment measure highlighted the hopeless inadequacy of many DSFs, the need for rebalancing of the church funds via funds transfers, which is all true, but the interdiocesan transfers proposed not only could almost certainly not happen legally or legitimately, but they're hopelessly inadequate. So, what is required are these sorts of levels of transfer that we're talking about, and a suitable and sensible source for that is the Church Commissioners' funds, remembering that that was the very purpose for which they were set up, the provision of funds to support parish ministry. To take a step-by-step approach to support this, just looking at glebe, our diocesan stipendiary funds are actually made up of glebe and diocesan stipendiary fund investments. No one knows the full value of the church's glebe assets, which is actually a symptom of the way in which they're managed. Save the Parish is supporting a national programme to establish shared financial and asset management services across, this is for glebe, across dioceses. It's going to start with 4 pilot dioceses and roll it out across the rest of England. The programme is endorsed by the Archbishop's Council and resourced and funded, so it's actually going to happen. Of the 40 dioceses with stipendiary funds, well over half of them, nearly 60%, fail to manage them effectively or make any use of them at all. Even more fail to use total return accounting, which has been explained before, but I will give a quick explanation again. So, addressing the problems with diocesan stipendiary fund. The best way to do this, given that we already have this national programme to implement improved shared service financial and asset management for glebe, is to bring diocesan stipend funds under exactly the same management. And the reasons for this is it's already happening. Glebe sits within the diocesan stipendiary fund. Glebe and diocesan stipendiary fund investments are both there to fund clergy, and diocesan stipendiary funds were originally, when they were set up, they were held by the Church Commissioners, so for half of the time that they've existed, they have actually been held centrally anyway. The advantages of this would be that it would bring consistency and good practice, address through this, address the problems of the fact that they're not being utilised and there's poor management, and we could be assured that they would all use total return accounting where possible. Just to give a quick reminder for those who heard it before, total return accounting is it's something we explained at the Fringe in February, at February's General Synod. This accounting practice it's actually also promoted by the National Church, and it makes it possible for dioceses to treat some of the capital gain on endowments as income, and under very tight actuarial rules to maintain the underlying real value of the fund. So it became legal in 2013, voted for by the General Synod in 2016 to be applied across the Church of England, but still 29 out of 40 dioceses not using it. And universal application of total return accounting, just taking a very conservative figure from 2021, it would double the amount of money available for clergy from the DSF, which would, in conservative terms, be £25 million per annum, enough for another 455 additional clergy. So, what would these proposals yield in terms of increase to income and priest numbers? What we've got on this chart is a step-by-step approach leading up to the concept of substantial transfers from the church commissioners to the diocesan stipendary funds. But starting with this national programme to establish effective management, shared service financial management for glebe. Following on from that, bringing DSF under the same shared management system, all dioceses they're actually starting to use their DSS. And then also, within that, making sure that they're all using total return accounting. With the credibility that would give at the management of our diocesan stipendary funds, the church commissioners and the Archbishop's Council could transfer money with confidence to be held in that well-managed fund to yield these sorts of benefits. What we're looking at there, as you can see from the bottom line, is almost 2,000 more priests, an increase of over 25%, which is about another 50 more priests per diocese. And let's compare that with the well-intentioned but unlikely gesture that the most likely candidate for making one of these interdiocesan transfers would make, which is the proposal by Oxford, the Diocese of Oxford, that they would transfer £250,000 a year for 4 years. That's enough for less than 5 parish priests for those 4 years, compared to an additional 100 million and nearly 2,000 priests, so about 400% more, 400 times more in perpetuity. This afternoon, as I said, we will debate revitalising the parish for mission. We won't revitalise the parish with less and less priests, and the DSFs don't have enough money to support the priests needed for revitalising the mission. And that's why we propose these 4 radical steps. Bring glebe under control and with the shared management services in the current proposed and planned programme. Extend this to diocesan stipend funds. In that same way, through the management of the diocesan stipend funds, ensure universal utilisation of total return accounting, and then make the necessary transfers of funds to establish adequate diocesan stipendary funds. We need to develop the firm plans to achieve this. This is the strategy to support the revitalisation of parishes.
Thank you. Thank you. just looking what happened to our slides. There we go. Let's go to this, speed things along. We need to remember, going back to that National Churches Trust House of Good report, demonstrated with robust analytics, I should add, that our churches yield an incredible $55 billion of social and community benefit, and that's before you consider their spiritual contribution. Now, to do this, ideally, they would continue to exist on the ground as functioning churches, and to do that, they need parish priests. John started by demonstrating that falling priest numbers result in reducing congregations, and that's what you see here as the student we referred to earlier. And we've acknowledged how the inevitable outcome of this is our church's situation, really, in which funding for clergy stipends is cut, the number of priests goes down, congregational numbers decrease as a consequence, and the loop becomes self-perpetuating. Most importantly, we should take a more optimistic picture. As Rob has explained, we've heard that there's no need for us to continue in this fatal nosedive. Save the Parish, therefore, will be working for supporting the establishment of effective shared financial and asset management services to address the failure to manage glebe, let alone report on it in a way that we can understand what's happening. Ensure that the deficiencies in the management of diocesan stipendiary funds and their underutilization are addressed by getting them looked after by the same shared service management professionals. Achieve utilization of total return accounting, so we're maybe making more use legally of the capital in our glebes in a way that's sustainable and prudent. And finally, see that the university acknowledges inadequacy of the levels of DSF. And earlier today you might have heard the story of Liverpool, saying we're not failing, we just historically don't have the wealth to draw on as others. And in fact, when you look at that lead table, this is about saying if we leveled everyone up with a healthy DSF fund, that could maybe be a different place to start from. So with that, I will click through and thank you all for listening.